Hello, I'm Edgar Wiggins, your host for this show that is dedicated to providing you with practical and useful information regarding mental health issues and needs. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in this country, with a suicide occurring every 13 minutes. Additionally, there's a suicide attempt every 32 seconds. Here to explore this important issue with us and also to share her journey of personal recovery is Daphne Kline. And Daphne is the Executive Director of On Our Own of PG County. Good morning and welcome to Mental Health Matters.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, before we start talking about your personal story, can you say a little bit about what On Our Own is? What does the organization do?
Absolutely. We're a private nonprofit, and we help individuals that have a mental illness recover on their own terms, person-centered, however they define that. Not trying to dictate their own path, but trying to encourage them and motivate them to take whatever steps they believe they need to get where they need to go.
So that's very interesting. That's different than treatment. You're really talking about recovery, which is a very different perspective, and sounds to me like you're really supporting people in their journey rather than prescribing treatment or a cure, so to speak.
Absolutely. There are different modalities that people can get recovery from, but from personal experience, peer support and sharing that lived experience is the greatest way to go because it helped me.
Okay. So let's start out by talking about you. Tell us a little bit about your journey, and I guess a good place to start would be by talking about your suicide attempts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At that time, it was very difficult for me. I was 14 years old, and my parents were going through a divorce, or about to go through a divorce. So no one was home a lot of the time, and not only did I feel alone at school because I had a mental illness and I felt different, but then also being at home, I was alone. And it was very challenging for me because I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't really understand the dynamics of a relationship at that time. And I would try to just get through the day sometimes, but other times that wasn't possible. And I would come home from school and I would cry almost the whole night, and often would think about suicide and thinking about not being here and what would I do? And I did have a really good friend of mine at the time. His name was Ryan, and he saved my life. Every night I would come home and he would stay on the phone with me for hours after school, and we would talk about all different types of things, just trying to get me to hold on to something, to bring me until tomorrow.
Did you have a sense of why you felt so desperate?
Because of the lack of support from, that I believe from everybody else, because they didn't know what I was going through, and I didn't know how to reach out. I didn't know how to say, hey, I need help. Something's going on and it's not right. Because I was 14, I was supposed to be happy and joyous and, into all these extracurricular activities. But no matter what I would do, it was, I guess, the trauma and the thought of my parents not being together and not having a happy home that I thought that I had or that we had when I was younger.
So that really was the precipitant for you, was the breakup of your parents' marriage. But you also made a comment, you said you had a mental illness. Did you have an awareness at that age of what was going on?
I knew that I was different. Okay. I knew that instead of feeling a part of the crowd, I felt a part from the crowd. Mm-hmm. And there was, a little bullying going on that I had experienced. It might have been normal teasing to other people, but possibly because of my mental illness, I was more sensitive to that. And nobody really understood what I was going through at home. So, sometimes it was really challenging for me, but I just tried to hold on.
And this friend that you were confiding in, when you got to the point where you felt like you were going to do something, actually take action and try to end your life, what happened?
Well, I love the story, and I speak to Ryan to this day. In fact, I spoke to him this morning. And every night, Ryan would tell me, if you're going to do something, just call me, because I want to be the last one to say goodbye. So on this particular day, I called him. I had just taken a bunch of pills, and I was crying, but I was told to keep my promise, and that was something that was ingrained in me from my grandmother. So I called him, and I said, Ryan, I just want to say goodbye. I kept my promise. And he said, well, Daphne, hold on 1 second, because the pizza guy's here. Can you just hold on? I said, oh, okay. And maybe 5 minutes later, there came Ryan busting through the window and, doing what he thought was the Heimlich maneuver, which I guess it worked, and ended up saving my life. And I'm so thankful for that, because I don't know what I would have done in that situation, but him reaching out and knowing what I was like and what I needed, he did it perfectly.
And so what happened after that, after he intervened?
Then I really felt the depression come on, and I really wanted help because I was so unhappy. There's only so many days that can go by that, you're a teenage girl and you're crying and you're so unhappy before you realize, I have to do something. And I begged to go to the hospital. I mean, what teenage person begs to go to the hospital? But I knew that I had to do something, and I had to get somewhere where people could help me and watch me and give me what I needed to survive.
Now, in terms of your parents, when you made the attempt, your parents weren't home and Ryan rescued you. Did you communicate with them about your attempt? Was there any, this is what I did because I felt so bad?
I mentioned it, but they weren't as receptive, and I don't know if at that time they were going through their own things, so they couldn't really hear what I was saying, or if I wasn't articulating myself well enough because I was 14. So I don't know if I said, hey, you know what, I tried to kill myself, or if I said, hey, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore, but I don't know how I described it. But I felt that I was just very unheard. Right now we have something that is like person-centered, that you're in the present where somebody is. That wasn't the fact back then, and that was lacking because so many other things were going on.
So when you advocated for yourself to go to the hospital, take me through those steps.
So it was a long process of me begging to go in. Finally, my grandmother stepped in. And she explained to my parents, she's saying she needs to go to the hospital. She's, a teenager. Let's do whatever we need to do to get her in there. And they looked at all these different hospitals and what the insurance would cover, how long it would cover me for, how long I had to be there. Was I sick enough to go into the hospital? Which is kind of just a terrible thought as I think about that, because nobody wants to go to the hospital for fun.
Exactly.
So in going to the hospital, I learned a lot of tools. Finally I got in and I was happy about that, and I felt safe. I had structure. I had people that, cared about me and my survival. And I met a lot of people that shared their story. And it was a very warming feeling, but unfortunately, the insurance doesn't cover you in there forever.
Right.
And my time was up, but I wasn't ready to go. And I really didn't want to go. So at the end of the hospital stay, they consider shampoos and conditioners contraband because of the content in the chemicals. Well, me and my bright idea, I said, well, you know what, I don't want to leave. I'm not ready. And I went and I drank the shampoo and the conditioner. Ended up getting very sick.
Sure.
But that was my second cry for help. saying, I'm not ready. But whatever system they use to gauge how ill you are or if you really need to stay, said I needed to go because it wasn't long term that I was there for. It was short term.
And after ingesting the substances?
I was so ill, I was so sick, but it didn't matter. I was discharged the next day.
Okay.
And I had spoken to them, and they knew. The mental health technicians knew, and one of them just said to me, well, don't do that again. And then I saw the doctor the next day as well, and he sat back and he smiled and he said, just don't do that. You know better. And it wasn't a fact of me knowing better. It was a fact of me being in pain and not wanting to go back to that home life or the environment. It was about me trying to survive, not to manipulate or to frequently stay in the hospital. I just wanted to be okay.
So it was a real cry for help.
Absolutely.
And you had found the hospital to be a safe and supportive environment.
Mm-hmm.
What happened next?
Well, what happened next is that I got out of the hospital, and I didn't know at that time trauma and how traumatizing it was. My parents got the divorce. My father was supposed to sign papers for the divorce, and he didn't end up signing them, but the lawyer had told my mother, well, he's going to go and sign them, so you can go wherever you need to go. And my mother took me and my brother out of state.
I see.
Which was, considered kidnapping because the papers weren't signed and we didn't go to court. But I was young, I didn't know really too much about anything.
So you didn't really understand the parameters of the custody agreement?
Not at all. Mm-hmm. And from there, I almost felt like it was a tug of war between them. And I wanted to, I wanted to be wanted. And I wanted a good home life that I thought that I needed. But that wasn't the case.
Okay, well, we're going to stop you right there while we take a short break. We'll be right back.
You sure you don't want some? It's chamomile. Listen, you are extremely terrifying. Just the scariest undead subhuman thing on TV, and I really mean that. But I am worried that you could give my kids nightmares if they see you, so I'm gonna have to block you. So that's it. Oh, and tell the zombies they're blocked too.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Ready or not, here I come.
Take time to be a dad today.
Daddy, I'm gonna find you.
Time to wake up.
I've got a job to do today.
I've got a job to do today.
Don't forget, you've got a job to do today.
Hey, Mom. I got the job. Thanks.
I've got the job. Welcome aboard.
Have a good first day at work, Mom.
Your donations to Goodwill fund job training programs right in your community.
Feels good to start fresh, right?
Sure does.
And like that, you're a job creator.
Cook foods to the right temperature using a food thermometer. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
Welcome back to Mental Health Matters. We're joined today by Daphne Kline, who is the Executive Director of On Our Own of PG County. We were talking in the last segment about your struggles with depression, your 2 suicide attempts, the fact that much of this was at least precipitated by the breakup of your parents' marriage, and then you left us kind of at the point where you were being taken out of state by your mom. So let's pick it up there. What happened next?
So we were out of state, and I had no contact with my father. I didn't know what was going on. And one morning, my mother woke me up and said, that your father is here with the authorities. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? And there was some commotion, and she said, well, Daphne, we have to meet your father in the parking lot down the street. So she took me and my brother. My brother's 11 years younger than me. Mm-hmm. And we went to this parking lot, and my father was there with the authorities. And he took my brother, and I said, I want to go too. And my father said, I'll see you when you're 25. And he took my brother, and I was there with my mother. And it was a very difficult time because I was very attached to my brother. In essence, he was somebody I was taking care of, like a living doll almost.
But what was your sort of emotional reaction to your father taking your brother and leaving you behind?
Devastating.
Okay.
To this day, I think about it. I realize that people do the best they can. And my parents do the best they can. And when emotions are heightened, sometimes we don't think things all the way through. I know he didn't do that to be mean. I think that he did that because possibly he thought that, my mother, had spoke to me so much and didn't know what would happen next. But that, here's a little boy, and let me at least, keep him safe.
Sure. Okay, so from there, can you talk a little bit about how you got into treatment and recovery? Because we got a pretty good idea of what your family background was like and some of the challenges there.
I want to say that my road to recovery really started from a place that I had no hope at all. I experienced homelessness, battling with the system, navigating, trying to get help, and not having a stable home. And through my efforts, I tried to piece things together one at a time. And luckily, everything kind of, fell into place little by little, and I started volunteering for the Montgomery County Crisis and Suicide Hotline. And that's when I realized that from my lived experience and from everyone's shared story, that's where the hope starts. It's with peer support.
Okay, so you went from being desperate yourself and a hospitalization. Were there any more hospitalizations?
So I had another hospitalization when I was 17.
Okay.
And that was pretty rough, but a very short stay because they saw that, I wasn't sick enough or ill enough or however they categorize that, but I wasn't sick enough to stay very long. And I think I was there for maybe like a week and a half or something, and then out I went. Okay. And no support after there. So there was no follow-up hospitalization. And the only thing I was very lucky is that the psychiatrist that I had in the hospital also became my psychiatrist outside. And that was the thread that kept things together and kept me together, because at that time I could not explain where I was or what I had gone through. So I was lucky to have somebody there that kind of knew the story.
And from there you had bouts of homelessness and trouble navigating through the public mental health system. But somehow in the midst of all of that, you decided to volunteer at the Montgomery County Crisis Service.
Yeah, just backing up a little bit, right, before that, when I was trying to get everything together and in the midst of another traumatic event, I was working for a corporate company. And I was supposed to be going to another location in New York to work with them for industrial psychology. And I really liked the corporate world at that time. But I said, you know what, I want to do this internship in New York, but let me just kind of hold back a little bit. And luckily I did, because 9/11 happened. And I would have been in that building. And on top of losing a family member in 9/11, I have survivor's remorse. So every time 9/11 comes around, 2 weeks before, I know that I have to, get my wellness tools together. I have to get my supporters together. I have to do all of that for me to survive. But before, I didn't know what it took to survive because I was stuck in the moment and just wanted the pain to end. There was no future. So every little step that I made in the progression and my efforts in recovery was the catalyst for the next wonderful thing happening in my life. And I wouldn't have experienced that if I didn't, reflect on learning from those experiences when I had those dark times.
So you volunteer at Montgomery County, and then?
So then I took a training